The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hi, everyone, and we're back with another episode of Ask the Landlord with our favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York City, Pittsburgh, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. renter. And together, we're going to be asking this landlord some questions. If you have a question for Albert, call us and leave us a voicemail on the Ask the Landlord hotline. That number is 646-580-3015. How are you, Albert?
I'm well, Melissa. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so good. I'm back in Pittsburgh, so we're very happy.
You're a homeowner now, so
I
fun.
am. We will talk about that. Thank you.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
got it.
So the question they have today is, what happens when a tenant needs an emergency fix in the middle of the night? Do you have a story to share? A toilet overflowing? Something like that. What happens?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melissa. I think the first step when you ask that question is to know, for everybody to know what's an emergency, right? And I think people use that word too loosely, and it's nice to make sure you define for yourself as a landlord and for the residents, hey, these are emergencies. Like, what's an emergency? Emergency is no power. That's for sure an emergency, right? No heat in the winter, an emergency. No water, an emergency, right?
A cockroach, not an emergency.
Emergency, right?
Right.
Broken kitchen cabinet door,
Not an
not an
emergency.
emergency, right?
Mm-hmm.
A crack in something, not an emergency, right? But for certain people, and we all know why, certain people are like, look, everything's got to be in a certain place, and to me, it's an emergency if everything is not perfectly done. So we all, we understand that everyone's different, but there are things that are emergencies. For example, what happened? I have a couple of examples recently. One was, and it happened to be one of my employees was living in an apartment, and in the middle of the night, his ceiling was leaking because we had like a backup on the roof, and it was literally leaking onto his bed. I mean, it's an emergency because it has to be dealt with right away. Like, it's like, and it can get worse and worse. So that's what we do there is what my wife says, and this is really the landlord's life is like, you're on call 24 hours a day because people are living in the properties, and emergencies happen. Like, an emergency happens in your own house, you got to take care of it right away. There's no it is what it is. Some, to the best of your ability. Obviously, natural disasters, things like that. You sometimes it takes days to handle things like that, right? When there's no power to the whole neighborhood, what do? That's happened, right? So you obviously, I'm going to say the common obvious things. You try to stop the source of the problem, and then you deal with cleaning it up. So immediately you try to, you obviously make sure that no one's being harmed, or property is not being harmed. A codicil of this conversation is, my employee had a lot of nice things, and they got damaged from the leak above. The leak wasn't our fault. It was like leaves, collecting, and the drain didn't drain, and the roof was fine, but then it leaked because there was water that shouldn't have been in an area that shouldn't have been. Fine, but we fixed it. But his stuff got ruined, right? And 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 he's telling me, "Oh, I have these things." I'm like, honestly, you're supposed to have renter's insurance. It's not expensive to have renter's insurance. relative to the cost of your apartment, these days renter's insurance you can buy for $200 a year, and it covers your stuff. So we had this in earlier episodes, but you're like, oh, what about my stuff? And I'm like, renters should have renters insurance because it's a very low cost, and it's in the lease like that we have. It's a very low cost for you to have, and if something happens, uh, the landlord doesn't cover your stuff. Okay, so
Right.
you gotta. There's companies that do that. It's a low cost thing to have, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
encourage everyone to have. So being attentive to the emergency, knowing that they do happen, having a protocol as far as a landlord owner. If I'm not available, I mean, I have a team of people. Like I have a guy that's on call, and if you can't get him, you get somebody else. You know,
Mm-hmm.
worst case scenario, obviously it's an emergency. You call the fire department or something like that. That's crazy, but because they
Yeah.
knock in the walls and ask questions later. You know,
Right. Like, do you have a super on call 24/7 or multiple
yeah,
supers?
we have a rotation.
So they are on call. I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, yeah, and we have weekend guys. We say, okay, whose turn is it? We like go on like a rotation. Um, but yeah, I mean, these things happen, and sometimes we got to get up in the middle of the night and to deal with them.
And
I had
the
another.
chain, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you.
No, as I say, the chain of command would be the renter would call you, or they would call someone on your team, and then you would deploy a super or the professional, right?
It used to be when I had less properties, they would call me, and then now I have. Um, they can they the super on call gets the emergency line gets dials a super on call. We have like a system where after hours, if someone calls, it goes directly to the super. There's other people also on the in our phone system. So we have a property manager, that's supervisor, other people. So usually get a hold of somebody in pretty short order. And with a lot of my properties, my people live in and around the neighborhood. So there's always they're not far. And I don't live far either. So um, that's the way we manage things. And it's important to between landlords and residents to communicate as to, okay, look, if there's an emergency, you call this number. Then this is when who the people are. This is where they are, so that really how to get a hold of people or who's going to respond to that. Uh, for example, where I live, there's really very little emergency guys. Like one guy lives in Staten Island, right? I'm in Manhattan, and and the other guy lives in New Jersey. So you're like, okay, so an emergency happens.
Hmm.
You know,
What happened?
no one's coming. No one's coming. Like I got to get my own guys, different. So
Yeah.
that's something that you you well then like something that happened to us, an emergency, like we have an elevator, we got stuck in the elevator. My kids got stuck in the elevator
Oh no.
or on the weekend. So how do you so then what happens is you could call the emergency number for the landlord, and then the landlord has to have people that are going to come take care of it, like the elevator people. So I don't have to have a super. Let's say I have a roofer or a plumbing leak. I call a plumber that comes on an emergency basis. But you got to have that set up. Like if you're gonna, you too. Like now you're in the house. You should have a plumber's number that you have a relationship with that you know, comes for whatever. But if you have an emergency, you know, you're not calling someone cold. They say, "Look, what if there's an emergency? What do I do?" You call
Oh
somebody
yeah.
that you know. So
No.
that's why it's good to develop relationships for everybody to develop relationships. Like what happens in a emergency, and then now that you're saying that, and I'm saying this, it's and these things have happened, and they do happen all around the country. And now I'm encouraging you, now that you're settled down, is to also plan for natural disasters, evacuations, things like that, and emergencies that are out of your control, that so that you have, like like a bag, like a go bag, your water supply, emergency supplies in a place that you can. What if something? What if you have a big flood?
Ah, you're
And it
scaring
knocks out,
me.
no, it knocks out the power, and you don't have
You're,
whatever. You need to have like prepared for that. You
yeah,
know,
absolutely. I got to stock up.
we had 9/11 in New York City, and the world shut down. I mean, we had a Hurricane Sandy,
Andy.
you know, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and it was a life changing event. I mean, you know, I had 8 feet of water in the first level of my house. Okay, like, dude, that's an emergency, and everyone had it. So now, what do you do? Like, so you had to be ready to go somewhere, do something. You couldn't leave. So my friends have wildfire problems in California.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so those are emergencies that are bigger than call the plumber emergency, right? What do you do, right?
Right.
So now you, homeowner, we had this problem here sometime, this is I'm in New Jersey now. The power went out with a major storm or something. And it went out for like 3 days. I'm like, so now we have a generator for emergencies. It doesn't solve everything, but some of the key things in the house get supported by a generator, like the refrigerator, air conditioning on certain floor or whatever. But that's something to think about. So there's 2 points there. There's, I guess, you're asking me what a landlord does in an emergency. I'm like, do what we can to fix the situation so that everyone's safe and has what they need. But then there's a lot of preparation that people should have on their own, given where they live, about something that can happen that you don't necessarily, look, I didn't think that people were going to fly airplanes into the buildings and shut down Manhattan. My wife was pregnant, 9 months pregnant, and due. Okay. And our physician was in Manhattan. We lived in Brooklyn at the time. And we couldn't get into Manhattan.
Oh my God. That is terrifying.
Imagine you're giving birth and you can't get to Manhattan. How do you go? Like, the Manhattan was shut down from 34th
Ew.
Street to the downtown. Like, so we had to go around up north and then
Oh
come
my
down from
God.
the north. And but you have to prepare for these things that could be out of your control. So
Hmm.
some thought into, what are we going to do if there's no power for 3 days? What are we going to do? The people in Puerto Rico,
Hmm.
I think it was Hurricane Maria or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they didn't have power. They didn't have water for 3 months.
It's like unimaginable.
3 months of no running water. I mean, how do you
Emer-
how do you
I
deal with
don't
that,
right.
right?
You
But I'm
lose
inviting
leads.
you. I'm inviting you to start thinking about it. You know,
You're right.
um, you know.
Hmm. I'm
So
definitely going to
that's
get
something.
an emergency kit going.
Yeah, just think about it, or plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, plan, and you could look on the internet, like, what I should have, and you think about also. I don't know. I think about this, but I don't know. In New York
What?
City, I'm going to say things. In New York City, we think about, if someone's gonna drop a nuclear bomb,
Oh, jeez.
like, where are they gonna bomb? Like, Pittsburgh's not gonna be a place they're gonna bomb, but maybe they hit New York City.
So what
So
are you going to do? You have bomb shelters, Albert?
no, so you
You go.
there are places that have bomb shelters, but you do
Hmm.
think about
Yeah.
what would happen if that's the case. Whatever, you try to think through these eventualities, or these possibilities of things happening and plan for them.
I do that a lot, Albert. It's the worst case scenario, even in like the most mundane situation, right? Like you're going to your in-laws. What's the worst case scenario? Be prepared, and then you can get over it easily, hopefully, and you have the right knowledge ahead of time. So
Yeah.
definitely
And then
applies.
also I think don't forget that there's three kinds of knowledge, right?
Mhm.
There's what what you don't know, and what you don't know you don't know. And you'll never know what you don't know.
Right.
So you should talk to somebody, other people, about what might go wrong where you live,
Hmm.
because you're thinking with what you know, and there are other people that might know different things. So it's good
Definitely.
to be prepared. It's fine. Those are, and then I'll tell you, I just want to relay one more story about an emergency. Emergencies are hard for everybody. Whenever they happen, it's very expensive to deal with, right? It's very stressful because it interrupts regular life. I had one tenant not too long ago that got their key stuck in the door, and it happened to have been their fault. But then at 10:30 at night, they can't lock their door or close their door.
Hmm.
It's an emergency. It becomes an emergency,
Yeah.
right? Now, so now, and I don't know how think about locksmiths, but now my guys are now I need to call a locksmith, an emergency locksmith. Something that could have been $100 is now $500. You know,
Oof.
and it was no question that it was the tenant's fault. But let's put it aside. My super was there. He couldn't deal with it. He couldn't handle it on site, and we had to call. And we 10:30 at night. Now I'm dealing with this for an hour. It's almost midnight, and we call the emergency locksmith. The locksmith comes. The bill's $500. The tenant didn't even say thank you.
Oh. Yeah.
That forget offering to pay.
Hmm.
Forget saying,
No.
"Oh, it was my fault."
Hmm.
How about I appreciate how you handled that emergency, and I know it was stressful. I know it was expensive, and it may have been my fault. It may not, but you know what? I appreciate it. No one said that. You know?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's where,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
and that's. I just want part of this podcast is to say, look, people are people, and you
Hmm.
gotta you gotta realize that you know yes, people are in service. You have to be working with each other and understanding that there's human beings on both
Hmm.
sides of this, and
Hmm.
that you're waking up the super in the middle of the night, right? You're waking up the locksmith guy in the middle of the night. You're waking up me in the middle of the night. All of us, and we're all want to help you, right? And you're like, could you be a little more understand? I understand it's an inconvenience having to be an emergency, but let's be a little bit, you know. And that's what really like they have a way of thinking about landlords that's bad, right? And that's not our thinking here. It's like, well, we're here to help, we're here to serve you, and you got to realize it's a two-way street. We're
Definitely.
human, so
Absolutely. No, I think that's a great point to close on because just be nice. And if you do have an emergency in the middle of the night, like you said, first of all, assess, is this an emergency? Number one, can I handle this myself? Stop the problem. If it's a real emergency, call 911 or the fire department, right? And then if not, just hope for the best and be nice to your landlord and super because, yeah, they're just trying to help. So thank you,
yeah,
Albert.
yeah. Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you, and prepare. Be ready.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.